Look, I made some mistakes the last time I talked about Destiny. Not only did I not explain myself thoroughly enough, but I made some factual mistakes that unintentionally misrepresented small aspects of the game design, which I do apologize for. I still stand by the video for the most part, as long as it's understood that my perspective is one of a relatively casual, more solo, story-oriented player. I've tried no-lifing this series in the past. I always used to know every single detail about Destiny in the old days. I went in so hardcore in the original, but I mentally cannot prescribe my life to a video game that requires this much of a consistent time sink to be fully rewarding ever again. Not in the same obsessive way, anyway. So in a sense, you could say I partially ruined the series for myself by burning out too early by playing the game the way it's truly designed to be played. And while my familiarity does play a factor, I still have plenty of thoughts on the game that goes beyond somewhat petty, subjective rants, both positive and negative. To tell the truth, Shadowkeep is the first time since 2015's Destiny the Taken King expansion where I felt compelled to go back to the game for reasons other than to record footage for a video. But even with that aside, Destiny as a package at this point, somehow simultaneously is probably the best the game has ever been for a player like me, as well as also being fairly familiar territory in ways that feel stretched and repetitive. Before we get any further into this, let me remind you that again, I'm really not an expert on this game anymore. I'm not Dato, I'm not a daily Destiny Reddit user. Small incorrect details here and there that you Destiny experts might notice may slip through the cracks because of how much technical information is available about this series at this point. With that being said though, this review is based on over 80 hours of gameplay by a mostly solo player on the Steam version of the game. Also bear in mind that Destiny arguably, now more than ever, is a continuously evolving online service, so things may be updated or changed that is perhaps for you watching right now no longer relevant purely because of this video being tied to its upload date. So try to keep that in your mind in case I mess up, which I probably will. And if I do, be sure to leave expansive novellas in the comment section for me to not read. It's shocking to me how the entire lifespan of Destiny 2 has almost been a complete retread of the first game. You launch with an unfinished but functional husk, release 2 mediocre or straight up bad mini expansions, then later follow up with a bigger expansion that fixes the previous year of mediocrity and puts it in the state it probably should have launched in to begin with, then follow it up with a medium-sized expansion that isn't as bad as this, but isn't as good as this either. So for those of you who are in the know with pointless Destiny franchise knowledge, Shadowkeep kind of boils down into what is essentially the rise of iron of Destiny 2. This is yet another case of if you're already into this thing, then it's just more of the same thing you already like. And if you think this looks repetitive and boring, then it sure will be repetitive and boring to you. I fall somewhere in the middle at this point. I think Destiny is slowly but surely getting there. It doesn't have nearly as many identity issues like it used to have. Overall, it seems a lot more confident in the awesome action MMO service that it wants to provide. And overall, the game feels more generous and open in terms of how you want to go about earning loot to increase your power level, which is one of the main gameplay loops of the series. Every time Destiny releases an expansion that actually expands on what works, then we tend to be in good hands for the most part. Why remove all of the minutiae that people liked when you can build on top of what's already there and grow it accordingly? And to be fair, no one seems to understand this more than Bungie themselves.
We want to build Destiny for its core fans. We want to make sure that we're building it for the people who love it.
Who in their utterly pretentious and annoying behind-the-scenes Vidoc they released shortly before the release of Shadowkeep made sure to emphasize the fact that they know the exact type of person they're making the game for now. It's a confidence I haven't seen from Bungie for a long time, and a singular vision is obviously a whole lot better than trying to design something that pleases everyone, because as we all know, that's pretty much impossible. It makes me wonder if the split from Activision has shifted the company's values a little. Instead of dumbing down everything to appeal to a broad audience of idiots, they appear to be honing in on the obsessive addicts who actually play the game for longer than a week, which to me is the most obvious and sensible way to treat this. With the more complexity, reward loops, and systems you can offer for a player to mess around with and learn, the more likely a community is going to form that likes to strategize, communicate, and min-max every piece of loot and armor in an attempt to figure out that very vast meta. And these are the same people who are going to spend hundreds of dollars in the microtransaction store because they're just so into the service the game provides. This does mean that Destiny at this point is a fairly overwhelming experience to wrap your head around at first, which I imagine would only be more confusing for brand new players who have never touched it before. Or I don't know, maybe my preconceived ideas actually make it harder to understand. But either way, this isn't exactly a new or surprising thing for a typical MMO or online service. They are inherently complex beasts. But it does mean that trying to figure out the onslaught of different menus, icons, symbols, quests, bounties, pinnacle rewards, raids, strikes, weapon sets, crucible, collectible campaigns, side quests. It's a lot, is my point. It's a lot. Which honestly is a good problem to have. This is the first time in a while in Destiny where I've actually felt like I had a lot of fairly rewarding and interesting content to get through. Do I want to level up by doing weekly bounties, grind strikes, work on a quest for a guaranteed powerful weapon drop? There are just enough carrots on the end of just enough sticks to encourage that FOMO addiction the game is designed around. Although I still despise the mere concept of designing games around something like the fear of missing out. Now admittedly, I had not played the game at all since my last Destiny video from 2018, so as well as having new Shadowkeep activities to complete, I also had an array of quests that would have been drip-fed over time before this to keep the player base somewhat interested. I almost felt bad for the people who have already obsessively played Forsaken and its updates to death, because part of why I got any enjoyment out of this was because I did take a break, so the loot pool was all fairly new to me. I've heard mixed reports from fans about the current loot pool. Some seem to be fine with it, but others feel like there's a distinct lack of new options. I'll expand on my thoughts on that subject later though. I briefly mentioned how Bungie split from their publisher Activision, you know, the most money-first, bottom-line focused developer in the entire business, and somehow managed to take the Destiny IP with them. Yes, they're free! When are you guys gonna learn to stop accepting blood money? Shadowkeep is the first major piece of content Bungie have released without the disgusting, veiny publishing arm of Activision, so I can completely understand why they didn't attempt anything too mental with this expansion. From what I can gather, behind-the-scenes management of this series has been a mixed bag, to put it lightly, since they started to work on this franchise, allegedly scrapping entire builds and restarting projects that were shambled together in as little as a year. But no matter what happened behind closed doors, it was clear there was a certain level of tension building between Activision and Bungie, peaking when Activision announced that the sales of Destiny 2 Forsaken had failed to re-engage the core fans of Destiny. Whatever the hell that means, which obviously upset Bungie, who had busted their balls to get the content out in time for those obnoxious earning calls in the first place. This all came to a head with the two companies forming some kind of agreement behind the scenes and parting ways. I can't say I shed a tear for the fact that now when I buy anything in Destiny, it's hopefully actually going more directly to the studio that makes the game, and not into the slimy pocket of some Activision bigwig. So this news was reassuring to me, and surprise surprise, the moment Bungie ditched the oppressive, money-hungry publishing nightmare that is Activision, suddenly a fair few user-friendly, inviting features made their way into Destiny in time for this expansion. One greatly helpful feature I specifically asked for in my last video was cross-save, which is now in the game and works great once you set it up. It would be nice if they could implement cross-play, but I'm sure that's a lot more complicated to figure out. Maybe we'll get that in the future. Another neat addition is that there's now a free-to-play branch of the game called Destiny 2 New Light, which has pretty much every piece of content released before Forsaken available for free, and even bits and pieces of the new stuff is in there too, I think, with the obvious hope being that you'll get addicted and will buy in to be able to play Forsaken and Shadowkeep. I really do appreciate the generosity, but their business model is so incredibly confusing to figure out and describe to people. Even those who are in the industry find it difficult to explain how to access what content where and what features are free versus paid.
What do I buy, and what's it called, and do I need, which now I think they sell all together. And now, just for clarity, right, Destiny 2 Shadowkeep is the new SKU. It's if this season pass. Oh, what weapon do you have?
The way Destiny has implemented new forms of monetization has always been a groan-worthy, predictable reaction to industry trends, be it loot boxes, season passes, annoying fake currencies that you're forced to buy the wrong amount of, because they always price things in a manipulative way to try to coax you into spending more. Unless we forget, of course, because of Fortnite popularizing the Battle Pass concept, that means Destiny now has their own equivalent Battle Pass in there as well. So let me get this straight. You have to buy the expansions, then you can also buy optional extra cosmetics in an in-game store that is built into the reward loop, and on top of that, there's also now a battle pass system that you have to buy to get full use of, the first of which being included with Shadowkeep. I guess next season there'll be a new battle pass to buy, just like so many games are doing now. Of course, a game this generally convoluted also has ridiculously convoluted and somewhat predatory monetization streams. I really had an inkling that Destiny might go fully free to play and follow the Apex, Warframe, or Fortnite models of making cash, but instead they want to believe that they're above being free because they know they can charge for as many layers of irritating monetization as they want, and everyone's going to pay for it anyway, so why am I even complaining anymore? These designers seem to completely ignore the fact that the reason Fortnite got such good feedback for their battle pass is that it's free. So asking people to pay a couple of bucks to earn a few cosmetics is pretty reasonable for what you're getting. I have to admit though that out of all the games I've played recently that have a forced-in battle pass in their reward design, it by far makes the most sense for Destiny. It's easy to level up, the rewards genuinely help you power up your character, and you always feel like you're building towards something because of some of the desirable items you're guaranteed to get if you just put the work in. I enjoy random drops, but it's also nice to know that no matter what, you'll be able to earn gear as a safety net of dopamine drops in an ever-progressing line of unlocks. So many of these battle passes are filled with so much guff that it's hard to get too addicted when the rewards are so bad. It's the first time Destiny's ridiculously broad pool of currencies and items has proven to assist with one of these trendy bandwagon business models. I just wish they could streamline the process of getting into Destiny a little more, because surely it'd be a win-win for both sides. You'd probably frustrate less people and, you know, make more money, possibly. If the mere act of trying to get started playing the game feels like work to me, and I've got to look at all these graphs to figure out what I'm supposed to do, then I'm just not going to bother playing because I could just turn on something that doesn't do that. This all kind of reminds me of that mobile game, Plants vs. Zombies 2. I really enjoyed the first game and was excited for the sequel, but instead of just letting you buy the game for one lump sum so you could play it without feeling like you're being hounded for spare change, you're forced to play the game in this stunted, piecemeal way. So I quickly got frustrated and uninstalled it. When games try to nickel and dime you all the time, it barely even feels like you own a copy of the game, and you're more paying rent to have the privilege to exist in this mobile game world. I get tired enough of paying bills and subscriptions in real life, and just generally being constantly tempted by the sweet mistress that is free enterprise, but it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth because I feel like I'm being slighted of content I think generally is lacking from the regular paid game for the sake of having microtransactions. No one likes a flip-flop of Destiny, pick a path and stick to it. My vote would be to keep with a battle pass system and phase out the Eververse. I genuinely cannot stand that place. Every time I start getting sucked into the universe, I get an engram that has to be opened there, so I'm reminded that this is all basically a really expensive and pretty looking mobile game at its very worst. Every normal vendor in the game has a pretty plain menu compared to Eververse, which is bursting with all the real fun customization that is locked behind all of these annoying layers of currency and microtransactions. Honestly, I have no issue with extra monetization streams, but I consistently do not like this store and the way it constantly tries to tempt you to spend money in it because you're so desperate for a meaningful reward to aid your player expression. That's enough about the monetization side though. I know it's really boring and repetitive to talk about, but it has to be said, I'm afraid. It's annoying to me. Lone Wolf. Usually by now in the video I probably would have talked about the campaign a little more, seeing as that's what usually takes up the biggest section of my Destiny videos. People get so angry at me for saying that the story in Destiny is bad, even though I think it is pretty consistently terrible from a top-level campaign perspective, without studying the lore like a history book. And really, Shadowkeep's campaign is no exception to the precedent that is set by years prior, which means it's pretty awful. If I had to rank each major piece of Destiny content based on their campaign alone, for me it would probably go The Taken King, Destiny 2, Forsaken, Destiny 1, Shadowkeep, Rise of Iron, Osiris, Warmind, House of Wolves, Dark Below. So we're looking at what, campaign-wise, is a pretty mediocre affair. If not straight up, kind of bland and forgettable. The storytelling is about what you'd expect, which usually means some pretty corny, annoying dialogue, vague teasers that imply a depth that isn't really there unless you become a student of Destiny lore, and of course it wouldn't be Destiny without an inevitable build-up of some reskinned enemy or location. Thing is, I can feel the steam coming off the people who get annoyed when I talk about how bad this universe is from a storytelling perspective, but you can't really blame me for expecting a little better from these guys for two reasons. One, they kind of made Halo, and 2, they are selling this idea that you can play your way. They're the ones who set my expectations a certain way by selling this idea that we can discover Destiny's rich world and characters through cinematic story missions. I'm sorry, but you can't use the word story, or cinematic, or characters even, and not have any of those things. Is certainly a step down storytelling-wise than the Mario Bros. Wii story of the Forsaken expansion, or even vanilla Destiny 2, which also wasn't very memorable. If anything, Shadowkeep kind of reminded me of that forgettable DLC for Mass Effect 2 that was supposed to bide people over until the third game was ready, except obviously with much less story than that. Destiny campaigns are like playing wiki pages, and not like an awesome sexy Brad Pitt wiki, more like a Rob Schneider kind of wiki. They're so weirdly detached and formal, it always feels like you're playing someone else's memory or something. Your place in the story has no real significance or importance, you barely impact the world with your actions in any meaningful way, you just kind of feel like an ant in an anthill, lost amongst thousands of others who are all doing the exact same thing as you, which at some points is strangely reassuring to know you're not alone out there, but other times it's just dull because you can't feel any tension or urgency. I've always liked the idea of pulling the whole darkness story back and focusing more heavily on the discovery of the unknowns of this universe. What I mean by that is that we still basically know nothing about anything that isn't implied or buried within the lore. Everyone already seems to be fairly familiar with the 4 enemy factions from the first game, so we never got a good chance to really learn much about them. Everyone in the tower seems to have known each other for a long time and have a history together, but it's not really a history we know anything about though. I swear we've been introduced to this universe at the most uninteresting time. What aspect of the story are we supposed to attach ourselves to? Because it isn't the characters, it isn't the plot, so what the hell is it? The lore? This is why I chose The Taken King as my favorite Destiny campaign. There were character moments, you were sent to a new location, and it was up to you to figure out what the deal was with this scary, uncharted demon ship. And there was a clear, threatening villain. And at this point, the clear, threatening villain was a simple, understandable motivation to keep you going. But they've done that exact same story so many times now. There isn't much of a threat at the moment in Destiny. At least not anything I can muster any more than a feeble, okay reaction for. Sure, the pyramids you've been teasing for years look like imposing star destroyers, but why should I be fearful of them? I know nothing about them really. They do such a bad job of establishing a baseline narrative hook, or conflict, or characters that are interesting or flawed, or any scenes of drama, or basically anything that makes a story interesting to an audience. Every story in Destiny so far has either been worse Star Wars, creature of the week villain showdowns, or a string of Marvel stingers. Think about it, the small tease at the end of Marvel movies is what makes up the main chunk of cutscenes in Destiny. How many times has Destiny pulled a, oh, what's gonna happen next cliffhanger? I can think of at least 5. Rise of Iron ended right as it started to become interesting. Warmind did a similar thing. The Taken King has a Marvel stinger at the end. Destiny 2 was full of teasers for the pyramids, and now Shadowkeep continues the trend of not giving any real answers to anything, and leaving it to my name as Bife to make a 4-hour video explaining why we should care about this universe. I even kind of like the idea, seeing that it's my idea, and all of my ideas are obviously incredible, that seeing as the game is already so devoid of emotion or character in any way, of exploring this universe in a more scientific or factual way. On similar lines, perhaps it'd be kind of neat if they had an almost Red Dead Online system where you could choose a subclass that specializes in something like documenting certain enemies for research, or they could expand on the bounty target system from Forsaken, or any number of dorky roles which could expand on the enemies we've been fighting so we can actually learn something a bit about them. I'd take gameplay variation every single time over one of these half-baked campaigns. If they really want to lean more into being an RPG, like they keep saying, we're gonna need more interesting classes and playstyles available to stop the current game from becoming even more stale than it is. The fact the original Destiny was so bad at introducing us to this world has always left a hole for me. I feel there are gaps in my knowledge of this universe that I really should know by now if I've been playing for half a decade. That's not to say there's nothing of note though. My favorite examples of world building being when I'd discover random scannable objects that would lead to my ghost giving expository dialogue about some of the alien races.
I read maybe something from the Cryptarchs, a theory that the Vex are actually that goo in their bellies. The constructs are just exoskeletons that they drive around.
I really enjoy dorky world building like that, and seeing as there are absolutely no characters I care about enough to see this information be delivered through, you may as well build up this universe in a more subtle codex-like fashion, which in a way is basically what they're half doing. This would be neat if it was actually more in the game. The cryptic lore tab is neat for those who care, but I still don't know why we can't have a more simple introductory in-game codex with information specifically related to the types of enemies and planets and races we interact with, so we can refresh our memory every time a new piece of content comes out. So I don't have to sit there wondering, what are the Hive again? What is their motivation? What is the deal with the Fallen? What is the Traveler? What is happening? I may have gotten a little carried away with complaints and lofty ideas there, but what I'm saying is that I don't particularly know why they even bother with these tiny one-act stories that go nowhere. If they don't have enough development time to create something more interesting, then maybe they should reel it back and focus more on combat or map variety or something. Because I don't know why anyone would care about this story unless they are a lore nut. I'm very much aware that it's easy to enjoy Destiny without even caring about the story and just enjoying the science fantasy backdrop as an excuse for fun, guns, and loot, but I always just wonder what it would be like if the story was good, as well as everything else that's already there that people like. I'm not looking for a Spec Ops The Line type of narrative from this series, I just think a more varied campaign design couldn't hurt. And maybe a few more cutscenes to expand on the characters or something, because that's kind of what it would take for me to even start to consider Destiny as a solid single-player cinematic campaign. While the game, in ways, is fairly focused from a mechanical perspective, I think Bungie, in general, have struggled with adapting this type of game design into a platform for telling any worthwhile, engaging story. They've just kind of left it to the fans to make interesting. Let's play Shadowkeep. I started off by loading my 750 power level Titan that I hadn't touched since Forsaken. When I loaded into the game and ventured past the onslaught of pop-ups, I spent some time reacquainting myself with the main social space. I knew that there were probably a few new additions since the Destiny 2 annual pass was released, which I didn't play any of because I heard nothing but how mediocre and not worth the money it was. There's this moment at the start of every new Destiny content drop where you kind of have to figure out what has changed and what works differently now. I swear they've adjusted the menus, quest logs, and quality of life details so many times over the years that if you don't pay close attention, it's easy to get confused. It's one of those things that's kind of half fun for exploring the unknown of something new, but also half kind of annoying because you just want to get on with it. I spent a bit of time looking at the fun stuff I'll never buy in the Eververse store because I had an engram I was instructed to open there, and went around picking up various quests and bounties, as is drilled into the head of every Destiny player at this point. You're introduced to a new gameplay mechanic called finishers. They're kind of like assassinations from Halo or executions from Doom, except not as fun as either of those examples. Now you have an option to instantly take out low health enemies in a slick animation that gives you some handy invincibility frames. I don't know if this edition really improves much, it kind of just makes the combat a bit easier in general because you can fling around instantly killing enemies while you're invincible. It's a shame you can only equip one animation at a time, so you mostly just wind up seeing the same thing over and over. But I can see how this kind of mechanic could be developed to add more ways of interacting with the enemies. I've complained before about how it bugs me how Destiny's combat has always encouraged you to deal with most encounters from range, and not let you have much of a choice otherwise. So it's nice they're experimenting with ways to reward players who like it up close and personal. I've noticed most people tend to ignore this mechanic though, when I've played in any activity with matchmaking, because killing things from afar is still so much safer and efficient for the most part. I do like how they look and feel to perform though, despite how it mostly seems to be implemented to encourage money being spent in Eververse. Oh well. The sheer amount of quests I'd racked up at this point had me concerned because I couldn't properly figure out what was new and what was old content I never finished, but eventually I just decided to focus on doing the Shadowkeep campaign. You head to the moon, a new old location, which is new to Destiny 2, but is largely made up of reused art assets from the moon map in Destiny 1.
Players are going to be called back to the moon, a place that they're very familiar with if they were players in Destiny 1, but they're going to find that it's been changed.
It's kind of like a remaster. They greatly improved the overall design of the map with plenty of new areas and tweaks that justify its price-tagged existence. Thing is, I'm so used to Destiny reusing old maps and content at this point that I barely have the energy to get upset about it anymore. It always annoys me when people describe it as nostalgic though. I guess in a weird way it could be, but Destiny 1 had some really awful missions set on the moon map. I always thought gamers hated companies reusing map assets. I remember there being a controversy about Far Cry Primal reusing the map from Far Cry 4, and everyone got really upset about it. But here I guess no one cares because it's Bungie doing it? Whatever. The open world patrol maps in Destiny, to me, are nice purely for the change of scenery and visual variety it adds to encounters. Gameplay-wise, they're fairly bland areas though. You can do public events and infinitely spawning fetch quest type missions by picking up beacons, and you can explore to find chests, various collectibles, and lost sectors, which I do like doing a little bit of. But the infinite monster closets these maps are designed around always remind me I'm playing a game instead of exploring a real living, breathing world like they're always going on about.
We wanted to feel like everybody has something new to do and feel like they're all doing it together. We're here to build something that lives.
Oh, shut up. I nearly always prefer it when enemies have a logical, contextual reason as to why they are where they are, like being dropped off in a vehicle or having explanations in-universe for being able to just appear. Like the Vex, which have always been the most interesting faction to me. I don't know why I find it kind of boring to travel around these maps. Perhaps it's something to do with how physically able your character is. Traveling any distance is easy because of your speeder bike, and traversal is even easier because you can literally fly for a short period of time. Perhaps if there were more sandbox elements, like enemy vehicles or weapons that were actually worth stealing or messing around with, then maybe the maps would feel more lively and interactive and less like monster closet farms. They try it here and there, but it always feels half-baked. And like, yeah, you have the option, but why would you ever bother? I guess what I'm saying is that these semi-open world maps have still never really impressed me mechanically. They're just not that interesting to me at the moment, without a specific mission to guide me through them. And it's potentially something I'd like to see improve in the future, seeing as we spend so much of our time on them. Seems like a waste of a lot of geometry and artwork to not give me a good reason to want to explore every nook and cranny of them. So a character called Eris Morn is kind of the main focus of this expansion. You see her walking around on the moon and stumbling across a ghost or whatever. Not like a Destiny ghost, but more of like a, I don't know, a ghoul or spirit. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of sick of this setup in Destiny by now. I thought after the Dark Below, the Taken King, and all of the Hive moments in Destiny 2 Vanilla that we'd kind of had our fill of Eris Morn or Hive-based content, but I guess not. I only say that because the Hive are my least favorite enemies in Destiny. They're much more generic monsters compared to the Vex or Fallen, and their entire aesthetic is starting to feel fairly repetitive to me at this point. I'm sure they could be made interesting, but currently, they probably have the most irritating enemy types to fight. Does anyone actually like fighting these clam things? I know I don't. Shadowkeep is a pretty simple setup. There's been a seismic disturbance on the moon which has attracted countless Hive. So I guess you're sent in kind of as pest control, effectively. The first mission does what the first level in all Destiny campaigns do, which is have a high production intro to trick you into thinking this campaign is about to be cinematic and grand, when it largely isn't. There are friendly AI ships flying around and NPC robots who are covering you. It feels like there's an exciting conflict going on. It makes the space feel so much more lively when it's populated with battling AI, but seemingly would be doing this whether you were there or not. You do some fairly basic puzzles and clear out a new area with the same tank from Destiny 2 Vanilla. It's fun enough. You head into a scary keep that looks like something from Lord of the Rings in search for Eris Morn, and you're greeted by those floating, creepy ghosts who are lingering everywhere on the map. There's a neat moment where you peek around a corner and you're greeted by one of those pyramid ships, which I remember from the concept art they released years ago. Of course, my imagination started to run wild with possibilities, my main thought being, oh nice, does this mean we're finally going to get a new enemy faction, and they've somehow managed to keep it a secret? The answer is no, so don't get too excited. All the pyramid really boils down to is beautiful imagery that the artists would have enjoyed putting together, but of course, more importantly, it's a tease for what I assume is going to be the next big expansion in Destiny. Can you see why it isn't that much fun to finally be shown something new and then it not actually affect the game or gameplay in any meaningful way? Maybe in the future this will retroactively wind up being kind of interesting, but for now it just feels like blue balling. You're eventually met with a firefight where your ghost exclaims about how these famous Destiny enemies are back again.
Crota? But he's dead.
You have to fight the Nightmare of Crota, which is reused from the worst Destiny content of all time, the Dark Below, which is also, by the way, basically a reskinned Night enemy from the base game. Then towards the end of the encounter, a few more nightmares show up, which again are reused characters from older Destiny 2 content. These nightmares are what are technically considered the major new threat in this campaign, despite all being reused enemies. Say what you want about a similar expansion like Rise of Iron, but the reskinned Fallen, at the very least, had a completely overhauled distinct style to them, which was incorporated into the map as well. I'm okay with them doing this kind of reskin concept once, maybe twice, which is basically what they did in the Taken King, with the Taken enemies just being reskins. But at this point, it just comes across like they're trying to bide time, which feels a little sour to me because you're paying a premium to basically experience the same thing I mastered 5 years ago. I've said it before, but surely enemy variety should be one of the top priorities for PvE in Destiny. All you do is shoot monsters, so why not strive to have a vast selection of monsters to shoot at to keep encounters fresh? This whole game is designed around replaying content. It just seems obvious. I feel like I've fought every possible combination of these enemies at this point, and I don't think their AI is anything that complicated or groundbreaking from a design perspective. And I mean, I don't know, I don't code these games. I don't know how complicated it really is. But why have they been so stingy about adding completely new creatures to shoot at? The only time they seem to want to flex that muscle is when they design raid bosses, that only a small percentage of players will even experience. Sure, you want to reward the hardcore, but at the same time, you don't want to alienate the people you've promised a rewarding story and gameplay experience. I think it's just a messaging problem. If you actually market what your game is capable of delivering, then you won't disappoint people like me. The end of the first mission has a cutscene where your character talks to Eris Morn about what the pyramid is, but instead of basically just saying that she doesn't really know what it is, she spouts annoying rhetorical questions in a cheap way to build up intrigue without having to develop or show anything actually happening.
Was it struck down by the Traveler? Left here on purpose? The truth is ours to discover.
It's implied that the only real information they know about these things is that they are what is responsible for the collapse. They're kind of like a physical embodiment of the darkness concept that they always played around with from the beginning. They tease that your main goal is to try to get inside the pyramid to find out more, which is a neat idea and a good hook to get you going. That's the thing about cutscenes in Destiny. When the dialogue isn't being noticeably esoteric and frustratingly vague, it's mostly just fine. If there were more than 3 cutscenes in the Shadowkeep campaign, then maybe there'd be more to talk about. But as it stands, what I would consider as the cinematic section of this content is literally about 4 minutes long. That's obviously not including the more descriptive dialogue you get through lore collectibles and vendors, or the extra cutscenes that are added as the seasons progress, but hopefully you understand my point. One positive I can say about how additional story is delivered is the way that vendors have a slightly more animated style to them. It's a huge improvement, especially considering the way it used to be in older content. This update may have actually been added in Forsaken or its annual pass, but I don't think I mentioned it in my video about that, so. From this point though, the campaign is mostly delivered through the more typical Destiny quest design. Investigate the strange hive behavior near the Scarlet Keep is where we start, which involves killing enemies in an area until 6 phantasmal particles drop. And then once you've collected them, that's just sort of it. The quest is more of an excuse to force the player to mess around in this area that has a new public event system to mess around with. Next, you're tasked with cleansing the essence of despair, which again is basically teaching you about gear quests that you can pick up from vendors. Next, the objective is simply complete activities as a way to prod you into exploring the new map and get lost for a while. I did a couple of patrol missions, which are the same as they've always been, and a few public events, which are also largely the same as they've always been. Once you're done with that busy work, you're rewarded with some armor, which aids you in the hunt for the nightmare of Omnigul. Omnigul's a reused enemy, again, from the Dark Below, one I always found annoying too. The mission itself doesn't do anything particularly interesting. You run through a bunch of areas that will be extremely familiar to you if you played the first game, and then fight a reskin of a boss that you will also be extremely familiar with if you played the first game. The next step is to complete the new strike, the Scarlet Keep, which is an interesting looking but mechanically bland affair. There was a time when strikes in Destiny were the perfect level of replayable and fun for me, where there are a nice amount of gimmicks, loot, enemies, and outcomes to keep it entertaining. And I swear they used to be a bit shorter, they feel so long now. But this one is fairly simple and has an uninteresting boss encounter at the end. Again, it's just fine. What? Next, you cleanse the essence of anguish by completing 3 bounties. Do you see a trend of what is happening here? The campaign is used for what is effectively an extended tutorial, which makes sense from the perspective of this game being all about repetition and endgame content, but it does make me wonder who really enjoys this type of delivery. I guess it is effectively what every game does to introduce you to its gameplay loop, but the thing is, this same tutorial-esque design has been fairly similar for a really long time now, so it's starting to feel like we've just been doing the same game tutorial for what, 5 years? They've put themselves in such a strange position by designing Destiny to only really be properly fun in its endgame, so they're forced to design these campaigns that everyone rushes through and largely ignores. So is it really surprising that they barely have narratives? It always feels like 2 steps forward and 1 step back as they figure all this stuff out. I just wish they could use all of these art assets they have in the bank at this point to craft together a 3 to 4 hour campaign with a little bit more going on. It looked like they were heading that direction with Destiny 2 Vanilla at points, and Forsaken had some okay moments, but overall they're still a bit lacking for me. I think if something like this was included in the next significant Destiny drop, it would be a really great addition that could help to build up a bit of personality in this fairly drab world. Maybe down the line we'll get something like this, once they've found a more stable development cadence behind the scenes. But I know they have the capacity, I know they have it in them, so I want to see it. At this point I was having some trouble with how difficult it was playing solo, because of my lower power level, and because I'm fairly terrible. So I decided to jump in the weekly Nightfall strike to make my life a bit easier by getting some new higher level gear. This is the part of the new Destiny content where it seems like the primary goal is to reach the new power cap as fast as humanly possible. It's the chase everyone goes after so they can be prepared for the new endgame content. Most of the gear that drops in Destiny will be of a blue rarity, and seeing as it costs a fairly valuable currency to infuse higher power into the gear you already have, I usually find that I just wear blue drops until the game takes me to the various level caps. I never used to do this when I played Destiny like an addict because I had so many resources that I could just upgrade whatever I wanted, but this is kind of how I play the game now. They really don't do the best job of explaining how power actually works, so you either have to play guessing games, watch YouTube videos about it, or just zone out and barely pay attention to it, like I did. Is the number higher? If yes, then I'll equip it. It's as simple as that. I'm sure there's some mathematically perfect way of maximizing your drops to level as fast as possible, but I just played without rushing and in my own time, and enjoyed the gameplay loop a hell of a lot more as a result. After you mess around for half an hour, doing bounties on the moon, your next step is to retrieve a new vendor from the bottom of the Hellmouth called the Cryptoglyph. Because Eris Morn can use its power to create a set of armor to help you get into the pyramid. Wait, hang on, this is basically the same idea as the main story in Anthem. Oh dear. Well, Anthem certainly is the level of quality I think every game should strive for.
Get glitched.
This is the only mission in the campaign that has a bit more going on mechanically. A large chunk of it is set in the dark, so you have to navigate by torch, which is a nice extra challenge. It also sets the mood quite well. There's a visually striking arena that has the looming pyramid in the background, which I have to say, gets me off a little bit. Bungie's artists are so talented. The guys and gals over there, they really understand the color wheel. Makes their environments pop. You grab the cryptocurrency and mine a few Bitcoin as you run away in a tense chase sequence which reminded me of that mission from the Taken King. Except, not as good. Because, yeah, we've already done it.
I'm sorry. The immense darkness of the pyramid kept me from you.
Glad to see the dialogue is as well written as ever.
Cryptoglyph.
Next, you're tasked to go through a portal and watch a cutscene. Nothing too much of note here, they're basically setting the stage for what might be a serious threat in the future. I wish they'd stop ending cutscenes with a dramatic crash to black, though. It's really melodramatic and silly to me. It's like they know how little drama's going on, so they've got to act and pretend like it is, to trick us into thinking that there is a bit of conflict to get attached to. So the bulk of the remaining campaign is killing more nightmares, so you can get a full set of plot armor. One mission is a reused strike from Vanilla Destiny, another nightmare is a reused boss from the House of Wolves. Yep. Really ain't that cute anymore. Once you finally have a full set of Dreambane armor, the pyramid awaits. Finally, this is like the only interesting thing about this entire premise. You climb as close as you can to the pyramid and it tractor beams you in. Whatever power lies within the pyramid controls your ghost and makes him say scary things.
Violence, beauty, truth. These things await inside.
The architecture is intriguing and the atmosphere is kind of frightening, and you see some weird blob in the distance that you can barely make out. It's all suitably mysterious. This must be it. We must be about to meet the new big bad in Destiny. This will be fun. Finally, something to think about. Really? Really? Isn't this the last boss from Vanilla Destiny 2? Do I really have to do this entire boss? Okay. Oh, it's this guy again. It's this guy. Remember him? Come on, step right up. Who's next? I suppose the theme of this expansion is kind of like a fan service celebration of what came before, but I don't really see it that way. It seems much more like an excuse to rejig old content while they work on new stuff instead of showing us anything new that isn't a static art asset. Next, you fight the second raid boss from Destiny 1, and finally head up a staircase to inspect an unknown artifact.
You made it. We have heard your cries for help, and soon we will answer. Who are you? Don't you recognize us? We are not your friend. We are not your enemy. We are your salvation. Salvation.
So that's the final cutscene in the Shadowkeep campaign. I'm just as confused as you are. Yet again, another interesting premise or first act of a story, but not much more than that. All I really have to say is that these new enemies better be worth all of this hubbub, because at the moment they're just seeming a little bit like the Reapers from Mass Effect, but without any of the things that made the Reapers from Mass Effect an effective force of evil. The way the final few seconds of that cutscene unfold are just so confusing to me. I guess it's implied that it's a vision, shown through the artifact or something, but once it's over you get no reaction shot of your character leaving the vision, so you just spawn back on the moon like, what? Did I skip something by accident? The main quest comes to a head as you talk once more to Eris. She takes the artifact from you and informs you that she believes that the pyramids have used us from the start. You don't have to be a genius to look at this and come to the conclusion that it's a scary force of evil that wants to destroy everything, but okay. The end. Game. With that fairly bland nonsense over with, the game actually begins with the endgame content being unlocked. You're given a nice selection of paths to choose, how you'd like to continue to level up your power and collect some loot. One of the new activities are called Nightmare Hunts, which honestly don't feel much different to strikes, so I can't say I got any new experience out of them, or really anything of note to even say about them. I started to mess around with a new reward mechanic called the Seasonal Artifact, which is another layer of grind to unlock mods for you to equip on your gear. I actually really like this idea. The more reward tools, the better. That way you're always close to some kind of reward feedback or drop that encourages the grind. It keeps the rewarding dopamine hits more consistent and aids the feeling of progress. However, I think the mod system definitely needs a bit of rework. The skills they grant seem pretty granular to me, so I didn't feel that motivated or tempted to properly experiment with the system and express myself through the options of the customization. This artifact changes every season apparently, so I'm sure it'll be adjusted and tweaked as the game goes on. Either way, I like the idea. I leveled up a bit in the strike playlist to get my weekly challenge gear drop. It's a decent mode for when you just want to mindlessly kill hordes of enemies. My biggest issue I have with it at the moment is the map selection though. Destiny has never let you vote or veto maps in its various activities, which isn't necessarily a problem, but what I found kept happening was that I was playing the same two strikes over and over again. I used to really like how in Destiny Vanilla, strikes were on a predictable rotation so you knew what was coming and wouldn't be forced to repeat the same exact content over and over. There are actually a fair amount of strikes in the game at this point, so it's frustrating that you can't get the variety you factually know is there just for the sake of RNG. RNG, everything is RNG. I swear the only thing RNG winds up meaning when talking about Destiny is really not good. Aside from little things like the lost sectors, which I enjoy exploring, now is kind of when Shadowkeep content has come to a close, aside from the odd thing here and there. Except of course for the true endgame content like the raid and the dungeon, which I couldn't do because I'm a solo player. If you want detailed thoughts on those activities, I'd recommend a channel like Datto. I know a lot of people, for some reason, don't enjoy the fact that I kind of retired from raiding in Destiny, but I'm just not at a stage in my life where I can sit around for hours having up to 5 people rely on my probable lack of ability, knowledge, and skill. The first drops of content from the season pass kicked in about now, because remember, for some reason when you bought Shadowkeep it also included the Season of the Undying. I guess that's how they justify the price for all the slim pickings that are offered when just Shadowkeep is isolated. Although in saying that, all that's really included in the Season of the Undying is a mode called the Vex Offensive and an exotic quest. I'll excuse the first season pass being pretty lame, because they nearly always are in these games at first, but if the next season is this light on content, let's just say I didn't get the digital deluxe edition for a reason. Besides, I can just jump in for the next major expansion and probably get everything I would have missed for free. So anyway, Vex Offensive is pretty bad. It doesn't have any standout aspect to it that differentiates it from any other activity in Destiny, so again, I have very little to say, except that it didn't really feel like new content to me. Same location, same enemies, same gameplay. I've seen it all before. I enjoyed the exotic quest for what it was worth. I like when Destiny has you actually use its environment for quest steps instead of just being kill, kill, kill and kill. One interesting detail they've been experimenting with of late, and part of why this video has been much more truncated than usual, is that Destiny has adopted a breadcrumb approach to the release of new content. This is to avoid the problem they used to have of everyone rushing through every piece of new content in 1 week and then abandoning the game because there's nothing left to do. On the plus side, it's a neat idea to get new cutscenes as the weeks go by, and even some elements of the map change here and there a little bit each week. Again though, there isn't much substance to them aside from vague teasing or bitter disappointment.
Really?
Really?
Woo. Really?
Truthfully, around this point, I took a break from the game for a while. I think I'd hit some kind of soft level cap or something, so my progression was ridiculously minimal, to the point where it seemed more sensible to wait until a seasonal activity appeared that had a powerful piece of gear associated with it. And luckily, that's exactly what happened. Destiny has an annual Halloween event called the Festival of the Lost, which features a cute tower reskin, a bunch of cool new customization stuff in Eververse to tempt you into paying real money. God, that's scummy. And new limited time currencies to earn various pieces of loot through another temporary activity called the Haunted Forest. I saw that the gun I could get from the event had significantly higher power than anything I already had, or would drop in the world for me at that point, so I grinded this festival activity, which is a reused version of the Infinite Forest concept from a few expansions ago, with a couple of horror-themed twists here and there, which were actually kind of entertaining to me. Once I grabbed the weapon, I started getting worthwhile drops again, and went on to casually enjoy the weekly challenges for guaranteed pinnacle drops that will always level you up slightly. This section of game time was definitely when I had the most fun. It felt like I had a lot of things to do and a lot of different activities to mess with, to keep things relatively fresh. I can't say I didn't feel like I got my money's worth. It especially helped that the pace at which new weapons dropped for me to play around with seemed fair and satisfying. I had a good time watching some garbage movies in the background and gradually leveling up from that addictive loop. When I was looking through my recordings, I noticed I'd accidentally recorded the audio from Netflix that was open on my other monitor. Hearing audio from what I think is The Hangover 2 while playing in Destiny is a bizarre thing.
Alan, it's time.
Here we go.
Ready?
However, this is where I need to talk about armor in this game. As rewarding as some of the gear drops are in terms of consistency, it is a real downer when nearly every piece of armor is a literal copy and paste from content that's come before. It was an awesome feeling in previous expansions when everything that dropped was completely new, so as a result your experience felt refreshed. Vendors in particular didn't get their usual loot refresh for Shadowkeep, and the absence is felt. As a rule, I gotta say I'm not enjoying how Bungie is slowly adding Destiny 1 into Destiny 2 and acting like it's new or nostalgic content. If the next expansion is another remastered map from Destiny 1, I'd be pretty disappointed. Unless maybe they went all in and just put everything that's missing in one sizable expansion that literally did add all of the content from Destiny 1 and its expansions. The decision to move on from the original and create Destiny 2 seems to be a huge mistake in hindsight. Honestly, I think Bungie probably didn't even want to do it this way, but were contractually obligated to release a full sequel. It would just make a lot more sense for Destiny to have been a platform that is updated over time, unless they wanted to completely overhaul the engine or mechanics, of course. It's the same thing everyone said about Overwatch 2 when it was announced. It looks like effectively the exact same game. Why is it even necessary to add this much confusion, aside from pleasing Activision Blizzard investors just like what they did for Destiny 2? Imagine how much more variety there'd be in Destiny at this point if every realistic old piece of content was always built on top of instead of being abandoned. That way, through better or worse, you'd at least be able to see the progression the game has gone through. It's a shame that these service games are so absurdly complicated to manage and maintain on a back-end level, because I fear that a lot of the real work that goes into making games like Destiny possible is an aspect that barely affects the actual front-end experience of playing the game. They must have so many employees who spend all of their time trying to solve the problems they continuously create, like PvP balance and power creep. Also, all of this is probably made worse because of how high of a standard Bungie put on the overall polish of their games. I have only very rarely experienced any technical issues or bugs since playing the original all of those years ago, which is saying a lot considering the state many games are releasing in nowadays. It basically feels like they've opted to have less, more polished content over a bit more overall variety. Why is The Hangover 2 a complete copy of the first movie but with a monkey instead of a baby? Oh yeah, and conclusion to Destiny 2 Shadowboxing, or whatever it's called. I don't want to call Shadowkeep the Hangover 2 of Destiny, but Shadowkeep is the Hangover 2 of Destiny. It's the same formula. All the stuff you liked the first time is there in spirit, but you can't help but notice that at the end of the day, it's kind of the exact same thing with absolutely nothing new to show you. I heard someone describe this series as a work-in-progress blockbuster, which is such a good way of putting it. It has always felt like Destiny has never properly nailed a consistent style because they have changed every possible system so many times at this point that it's basically completely unrecognizable to how it was in 2014. Sure, it's kind of neat to effectively be beta testing a product that our collective feedback and data is shaping, but it has always had to balance that concept with marketing that has treated this series as if it was on the same level as something like COD or Mass Effect. I guess it just goes to show how important information communication is. Of course, if you order a pizza and they deliver a burrito, you're going to be annoyed. Doesn't make burritos bad, but I ordered a goddamn pizza. I was told I was getting a pizza. You play Destiny for a loot grind, to experience the crunchy feedback from the gameplay, and murder a few 100,000 enemies. To master its reward systems, to hang out with your buddies and form weird little communities, to hear an awesome suite of new music, or to appreciate the work the artist put into the slick presentation. It's just really not a very good lone wolf experience in my opinion. And if they just got rid of that promise, I'd have much less to complain about at this point. I hope you've enjoyed my yearly ramblings on this series. It's almost like a ritual at this point for me. My next video will not be this absurdly long, so don't worry. One of these a year is more than enough. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you on the next video. Bye!